Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shane Combs. My brother Matt Combs here with me. We're on show 48 now of Expanding the Zone, and we've been talking a lot of basketball here lately. As we got started on our last show, we talked a lot about preseason and the busy time. And Matt, as I check in with you tonight, I've kind of been going back and forth on the agenda, and kind of as we get started here, I want to see what direction it takes us because I've got a couple ideas for tonight, and then as we move into some future basketball shows. But the first thing I thought I better do is check on you. This is the first time in basically your adult life, you're what, 25 plus years or so, that you have not been coaching basketball in the winter. How are you holding up?
Yeah, it's like anything else. I mean, people have asked me that a lot, obviously, just because probably the question that comes to their mind. But yeah, it's been a little weird. But there's times you really miss being in the gym, and then there's times that you go home, you get to go home after school one day and think, oh, this ain't bad either. So there's a little bit of both those things that happen. But fortunately for me, I've really stayed involved. I've got several friends in the coaching business still. I watch a lot of film and do a lot of scouting stuff kind of behind the scenes for them. And that's been good. So I think when we do our show, even it kind of helps that I've watched a lot of basketball, because it kind of just keeps you sharp, I think, on the game. And honestly, it's given me a little bit different perspective, just being able to kind of step back and not just watch. When you're coaching, you really are paying attention to your own team and then your opponents, right? I mean, that's really what you're doing.
Right.
I'm just watching kind of all kinds of basketball right now. So I'm just seeing a bunch of different. I've probably seen through my film work. I've probably watched. I don't know. I've probably watched 20 teams play at least one game. You know what I mean? This year, so it's been kind of cool, boys and girls for that matter. So it's been kind of cool to do that.
Oh, I bet. And, as always here on Expanding the Zone, we want to give a shout out to Dr. Chris Good and the support that he gives us, and make sure people know you can watch us on our YouTube channel. If you're listening on your podcast app there, and if you are watching us on the YouTube channel, make sure wherever you get your podcast that you check us out again, Expanding the Zone. Matt and I have some really good basketball content, I think, here tonight and upcoming episodes. Matt, as you were talking there, I guess that's where I'll start. You've been talking about all the basketball you've had a chance to watch and in a totally different perspective. As you stepped away from the coaching lens, when you got a chance to just be a fan for a second, what's something that I'll just kind of stay wide open with it. What's something that kind of jumps out at you that maybe you didn't always notice when, like you said, when you were just evaluating your own team or an opponent?
Well, excuse me, something that jumps out at me this year, which I guess this always has because I've always felt like it's important. But it's like when I watch a team play, I always try to figure out what their identity is, and what I mean by that is I guess that's a term we use in coaching where what's a team sort of rally around or hang their hat on? What is their main or one of their main focuses? It could be a style of play. It could be, just something that they do. It could be one of the intangibles sort of that they do, right? But just when you watch a team play, what jumps out at you, as an identity. For instance, local listeners might, just to give you an example, local listeners might, look at a great program like Logan Elm boys basketball, right? It's had a lot of great success over the years. I think when you go watch them play, certain things just jump out at you immediately, just the way they share the ball on offense and their spacing and their execution and a certain togetherness, right? The bench is always up cheering. When you're running the game, you hand a towel to the guy that you go in for. You come up. There's always this togetherness. Help a guy takes a charge or dies on the floor. 4 guys run over and help him up, right? There's things that you notice about that program. Just using that as an example. And I think when I watch film or I see a team, I'm looking for that. To be honest with you, I've seen some teams that oh, okay, this is what they try to do. And I've seen some teams that I can't quite figure that out, to be honest with you, what their identity is. And it's not an easy thing. I mean, shoot, there's been years I've coached that I didn't know what my own team's identity was a couple games into the year. And that's something I think that's got to be addressed for teams to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I guess as you were saying that, I got to thinking about your Vinton County program. Gosh, what 20 plus years there, never had a losing season over the last 2 decades. And there's two or three things that come to my mind, but I guess the one overriding blanket, if you will, over the entire Vinton County program was a certain sacrificing a sacrificing the me for the we, maybe the chemistry, the sharing. I mean, you coach some incredible players, but yeah, maybe you can tell me. I don't know if you know what 4 or 5 1,000 point scores, maybe. I mean, like it just wasn't very many yet. You had so many talented guys, but there was a willingness to share the ball. It very rarely was the Vinton County kid getting 30. Chances are 3, 4, 5 guys were getting 15. That's obviously not by accident. Like when you're describing Logan Elm, I'm sitting there shaking my head and I'm thinking, those things don't happen by accident. That's a culture piece. That's something that's emphasized. Can you put your finger on one or two things that you really prided yourself on that you thought led to that identity?
Well, I think you mentioned it a little bit there. I mean, I think one of the things we always tried to be was, for lack of a better word, unselfish, or one of those teams that I mean, everybody has ego. Everybody wants to be successful, right? But individually, but one of those teams that was tried to truly be happy for each other when they had success. We weren't perfect. We had moments of selfishness like everybody does, but I think that was our motto, right? Surrender me for we. That was on our locker room wall. That was what we really wanted to try to be. And I think, the best teams I've had over the years did that. And like you said, figured out a way to where they could give up a little bit of themselves for the being a part of something bigger than themselves, right? For the good of the whole unit. And again, I hope that, that was something that was visible. That was something that people could pick up on. It was just whether it be, making an extra pass and showing some unselfishness on the court, or whether it be just the way two teammates treated each other, the body language, or all those things sort of, I think, are the things that are visible when you're looking for someone's identity. We all obviously, other parts of identity, Shayne, as you know, are more X and O oriented, or the style of play, or whatever. Like for you, for instance, in the program you coach in with girls basketball, one of the big things is the ability to use the 3-point shot, right? I mean, that's something that's more of an X and O thing, right? Or a belief or a style of play, but it's something that, hey, we want to utilize this. And it's not just as easy as saying, hey guys, let's go shoot some threes tonight. I mean, it's something that you work on in the off season. It's something that you chart, that you keep track of, that you have to earn the right to shoot it, and all these things. Talk a little bit about how identity can be X and O related, not just the chemistry stuff and the intangible stuff, but actually a style of play.
Well, it's an interesting point that got me thinking about how a true identity is probably not just in practice or in a game or in season. It's probably who you are and what you do year round, right? I feel like it drives your workouts a little bit. The 3-point shot comes to my mind in terms of off season reps. I know we had our 1003 club, and that's kind of that green light club, some coaches will call it, or whatnot. And we try to use that as a confidence builder. Like, hey, why wouldn't you? Why would you even be fazed by missing 2 or 3 in a row? You made 1,000 this summer. You know what I mean? It's one of those things. It's a confidence thing. It's a practice thing. And then I think it has to be something that you practice what you preach and you fully believe. I think what happens sometimes, take the 3-point shot, for example. If you truly believe in an identity, you can't overreact to short sample size. You can't go to the locker room and have someone tell you we're 1 of 14 from the 3 and say, okay, we're not going to shoot any threes this half. You know what I mean? Right. One of those things where if you're staying true to who you are, and they're good inside out looks, and it's the right kid shooting it, and they're not forced, and you're going to let 14 more fly, and chances are, your work Your work ethic says you may hit 6 or 7 of them at half. Um, a lot of things too. You'll start to see how it carries over in other parts of the game, Matt. Like I always said, the 3-point shot, I'd love to rebound half our misses. So I think a lot of times the 3-point shot lends itself to more offensive rebounding because the shots are longer. They're coming off different ways. A lot of times quickness, effort, knowing where the ball's coming off. Some of those things. Yeah, I think as long as you can control your transition D and so forth, I think sometimes you can survive those tough spots. So I think sometimes it does relate into others. I tell you, as I listen to you answer, and then you ask me that question, I think where I would love to go this week is and maybe we'll separate the offensive stuff into maybe a future show of its own. I'd love to focus in on the defensive end if you're okay with that, because I think that's a great way we can go. We can start with something that comes to mind with you, and if you have questions for me, we can. But then we can just open it up and talk about all sorts of defenses, because I think there's some things that are true no matter what defense you play. You have to do X, Y, Z to be really good at it. Let's just start on the defensive end with you. I can't remember. I was thinking today in preparation for the show when you started doing it. I don't know if it's something that you used to have in your back pocket and you'd use as a little strategy, but you obviously over the last part of your Vinton County tenure for sure started to switch screens. You guys had a very aggressive style. You got really good at it. No matter what type of screen it was, there was a lot of communication. You were there waiting on people. You started to recognize certain things. Take me back into why, how that all started in terms of what you really like about it.
It's interesting, Shane, that makes me think way back, actually. And if I remember correctly, you're kind of putting me on the spot, but I believe it was about 2000. I want to say it was maybe 2012-ish, somewhere in there. We had a group that was like, basically we had a team that didn't have a post player, to be honest, like didn't have a true post player. So we had guys that were sort of all the same size, ranging from 5'11" to say 6'2", and it was a situation where we had seen some teams doing some similar things. I always admired and respected Coach Van Meter's defenses at Greenfield McLean, and they were doing some of this switching stuff. Now, see, when I say that, like, everybody switches something now. Some teams switch everything now. It's not quite as unique as it used to be, but back then, not a lot of people at the high school level especially were doing it. And so we had kind of been observing some of these other programs that we thought were really good defensively and trying to copy a little bit of what they did. And then we had all these kids that were guards basically, and we just thought, could we just switch everything? Could we just basically don't worry about, we're going to be mismatched anyway to an extent, because we're smaller. Could we maybe be more disruptive if we switch everything? And I think that's how it started. And then as time went on, that team ended up going to the district finals in 2013. So we had some success with it. And it just so happened, truthfully, that we had a run of teams where we were sort of that way, where we didn't really have a post, or if we did have a post, it was just maybe one post that we played 4 guards. And a lot of times those posts were good enough to guard a guard, so we just went with it. With times when we had a post that couldn't guard man-to-man, we had to tweak some things. We could talk about some of those things later on too if you want. But, I mean, that's how it kind of started, Shane. And I think one of the benefits that we felt like, obviously, there was a list of things we felt like reasons why we played that defense, but one of which was we felt like it at the time was unique. At the time, it was something that not a lot of high school teams did, and it fit our personnel. Because I think that's important when you choose a defense. It needs to fit your personnel. It needs to fit the way you kind of operate and the players that you have. And those two things were just sort of married at the time, our personnel and the fact that it was kind of unique. And we went with it, and we had a run of success with it that, quite honestly, we continued. We never went away from that defense, other than when we had maybe a slow-footed, bigger post player, we had to tweak some things, but we always switched mostly every screen.
Well, you mentioned it being kind of unique. Is that one of the biggest advantages of it? You think it was unique enough to where it had people in practice time preparing for it? Do you think teams had trouble simulating it at practice? What are some things that you noticed just in playing a team just 2 times a year, even in your league, that it would give some fit?
Yeah, I mean, we had a list of things that we always believed when we were choosing anything. You better have a list of reasons why you do it, and then you need to have a list of reasons why it's vulnerable, because there's nothing that's not vulnerable. Everything's vulnerable. If it was the perfect defense that was unbreakable, then everybody'd run it. I mean, everything has vulnerability. But yeah, the uniqueness was one because we felt like, okay, let's say you play a 2020 game back then, or a 22 game now schedule. At the time, you were probably only going to see a couple teams maybe that switched all year, if that. So now when you have to practice the week before our game, you're going to eat up certain hours of your practice throughout the whole week. You're going to eat up a chunk of that time getting ready for this, because you're going to have to show your team that something different to go, because you can't run set plays, okay, against the team that switches. You can't run a set play the way you normally put it in. Like if you put in a set play at the beginning of the year, hey guys, we're going to pass the ball over here, and we're going to screen here, we're going to come off here, we're going to try to get a 3 right here, okay? That doesn't work against a switching defense, because we're going to blow that up. We're going to be waiting on you when you come off there. So the only way you can run those sets is to take a different option, or to what we call slip a screen, or I wish we had film on here, but slip a screen, or pick and then roll back, something along those lines is the only way. And if you can imagine, you've been working on your set plays all year, right? Every day you dry run, and then all of a sudden within a 3 or 4 day period of time, you've got to take all those and say, well, we're not going to get this, so we got to look for this. Hey guys, we're not going to get this, we got to look for this. And we always felt like that was hard for a coaching staff to do in a short period of time. So it's going to eat up practice time. It's going to cause maybe a little bit confusion with your playbook. We thought it allowed us to be extremely aggressive and get out in passing lanes. There's no reason, if you're going to switch picks, that you shouldn't be way out denying next pass at all times, trying to get steals, trying to get out in the lanes. You can't play a switching defense and play a pack line or like a laid back, in my opinion. Otherwise, I mean, I guess you're just playing zone at that point, truthfully, if you're going to slough off and switch, right? We always felt like if you're going to do it, be aggressive with it. And then ultimately, we felt like it was, in a way, you could sell your team on, hey, this is the ultimate team defense, because we all have to guard everybody. So we're in this together. So we felt like we could rally our guys around this fact that, we're different. We're going to do this as a team. It's not going to just be on Shane Combs to shut down their best player. It's going to be on all of us to shut down their best player. So those were some of the reasons, Shane, that we liked it. Obviously, we had some, there's some things that we had concerns about too, but those were some of the reasons, I guess, Shane, that we did it, and we continue to do it.
Well, I was just making some notes as you're going here. Let's kind of talk on the other side, like you said. No matter what defense we talk about tonight, there's good and there's bad, and a lot of times it's like anything in basketball. It probably depends on how athletic you are and how good you are,
Right,
how talented you are. You mentioned some slips. You mentioned some different types of actions. Some people sealing back. I imagine you got into some mismatches. Some years more than others, depending on what you had. You guys were obviously aware of that, and I'm sure going into games, you could kind of pick and choose what was going to happen. Is that something that you talked very openly about? Is that part of your progression defensively in terms of being able to respond to that? I assume everyone had to be able to guard the post. Everyone has to be able to guard the ball, things like that. Talk to me a little bit about how, once you're aware of the concerns, how do you go about addressing those?
Yeah, one, you have to be aware. The players have to be aware of those, we would say, Achilles heel, so to speak, of your defense. Like, where are you vulnerable? And you mentioned, like, say, mismatches. Okay, so you have two types of mismatches, in my opinion. You have mismatches in the post, and then you have mismatches on the perimeter where you've got a slow guy guarding a quick guy. Okay, so in the post, you got a small guy trying to guard a bigger guy. So with that, we had to have an approach on both those things. So when you switch screens, I believe you have to full front the post. You got to front completely, not just a little one hand, one arm. I mean, I'm talking all the way around, with weak side to, like, knock the lob pass away or to steal the lob they try to throw in on you. And then on the perimeter, you've got to have a plan for guarding ball screens, because when you switch, people are going to ball screen you and try to get their point guard with the ball against your post player guarding them because they know you switch. So you can't just, unless you have a really athletic post, and those teams were really great because, then they could go out and guard a guard. You had to have a plan for ball screens. So a lot of times we would trap every ball screen, we just depending on the teams we had. There were some years we actually would hard hedge and then get back, almost like a team that doesn't switch screens would do, just on ball screens. But usually we'd trap them, be really aggressive, try to get them to give it up, and then get back to, kind of fall back into position. But the mismatches, the ball screens, those were, and you have to practice. I mean, you have to practice those situations, Shane. I think you'll agree with this, even if I know we'll talk in a minute, because I know you guys don't switch screens. There's certain things you have to practice, right? There's certain things you have to drill on. It's like I can't remember which coach said it, but if you want a skill, you have to have a drill or whatever. You have to work on those things. So like for us, when we did our post defense, we didn't have a post guarding a post. We had a guard guarding the post every time in our post defensive drills, because that's the mismatch we were going to get. We made our bigs guard the ball in practice at times and put them in uncomfortable situations.
Now, what was the percentage of that, Matt? Because like here's the thing, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, because I feel like it's the right time to ask this question. I think it's very difficult to run 2, 3, 4 defenses and be any good at all of them. I'm not saying you don't spot other defenses or whatever, but like, what was the percentage of the time that you worked on those particular things in comparison to, say, if you were going to spot a zone or if you were going to spot some of these other things?
Well, I think the percent, I don't know what the percentage would be, but I know with our man-to-man, you would work on it every day. I mean, literally every day. I mean, and you may not do the same exact drill every day, but you would work on some aspect of it every day. And I think with zones, with us, most years, we would work on zone once a week, maybe, or what, just depend. And maybe there was a game we knew we wanted to use it more or something. It might work on a couple of days. But in all honesty, it would be like, we never pressed a ton. We never played a ton of zone, but we always did a little bit of each. So I think we would try to work on that twice a week if you had 4 practices in a week or what, just depending on how many practices you had. Certainly wanted to have it in our arsenal, but you can't commit time to it every day if that's not one of your staples, because like you said, if you're not careful, you become like jack of all trades, master of none, right? You just work on a little bit of everything and you don't get really, really good at anything. So I think you have to take your number one thing and make it, your number one thing in terms of the way you prioritize time as well. So I mean, that's kind of what we dedicated to. And a lot of it was centered around game plan too, Shane. Like I think it always is, because when you switch screens, one of the weaknesses of it is if the other team has a great player, my buddy NJ Kite over at Benton County, they're getting ready to play Alexander this week, who's got a phenomenal player, and Kyler DiAgostino. There was always an issue with him because there were certain guys, well, there's really nobody you really want to guard him. You'd rather he didn't play. But there was definitely certain guys you didn't want guarding him. And when you switch screens, whenever another team's got a great player, and you don't switch screens, you can just say, okay, you can challenge a kid, right? You can challenge your best defender, like, hey, see if you can hold this kid under his average tonight. And when you switch screens, you don't have that. It's got to be more of a team thing. And you know that other player is going to be in some advantageous matchups for him at times. And so oftentimes we would be in situations where the other team's best player would score their average or even more than their average, but everybody else would be held down. You see what I'm saying? So like our philosophy was usually more of, you might get 35, but the rest of the team's not even going to get 15. And that was more of the approach. And ultimately you're going to get stuck at 50, but even if this kid gets 35, that type of approach, because it's awfully hard when you switch screens to focus on and be able to shut down one guy. So I guess my point to all that is, you practice those things, you game plan for those things, just like you would in any type of style defense.
Sure.
And I know, Shane, like for you, not to jump ahead, but like I mentioned a minute ago, I know you coach the defense, for your team. And look, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. You guys have been really good defensively. I know you're a huge believer, one, in man to man. I've over the years I've tried to talk you into, like, you ever think about spot and zone, and you're pretty, it's not like you hate zone. And I mean, I know we've talked about it before, but you're pretty adamant on this is what we do, and we're going to be really, really good at it. You don't switch screens, and you have your reasons for that. So maybe we can just sort of segue into that, Shayne, and you can talk a little bit about what your philosophy is defensively.
Yeah, throughout the last 20 years, I've been in a lot of different situations. I've coached early in my career 2 or 3 really, really good defensive teams where we played exclusively zone.
Right.
And then later into my career, coaching some man, as I've been more in the girls' game now the last decade or so, just locking in the man. And I think a lot of it is it's not even like you said, a dislike of one and a like of the other. It's just that I think you have to really, really be good at something. You really have to be able to hang your hat on something, and you really have to have your kids understand vocabulary, understand what you're trying to do, understand how you're guarding actions and so forth. So I think a lot of it starts with a mindset of, here's who we are, here's what we're going to do. And there's a special language that gets talked, right? It's kind of like the foreign language. You'll hear these professional athletes, quarterbacks, right? They'll go to new organizations and they'll say a lot of the language is the same, but sometimes you got to pick up on the different language of an offense and just calling the play in the huddle. I say it's the same thing a lot of times when you're coaching defense. When you're using terms like, hedge and recover and help the helper and top shoulder and bottom shoulder and tree to post, front to post, midline, all these, basketball terminology, they mean the same thing pretty much across the way. But I'll guarantee you, if you walked into 3 or 4 different practices, they could probably come up with about 10 words that maybe it means something a little different to them than it does another, if that makes sense. So
right.
I think the vocabulary is a great place to start. And then from there, I think it's a philosophy. For us, I'll just give you a couple staples. We're trying to never let the ball in the middle. So we absolutely never want the dribble to get to the middle. We full front the post as well. And I'll tell you why I full front the post, Matt. When I was a younger coach, I tried to tree the post. I called it quarter the post. Ball above the foul line, top shoulder, ball below the foul line, low shoulder. And what's happened at a smaller school, at least, is we're so much smaller than our opponent, almost 95% of the time, that I found kids were trying to front the post, and maybe you ran into this especially when you switch screens, and they'd be giving up. It's not even the height as much as they'd be giving up 25, 30, 35 pounds, right, of muscle and different things, and they would just start to get rooted out. Whereas when you get the full body in front, our rule was no bounce pass, no chest pass, no eye high pass. It's, you got that window right there that you're responsible for. Like you said, the lob is someone else behind you. So those are some of the reasons we do that. But those dribble rules and those front of the post rules are all about never letting the ball middle. So we pride ourselves quite a bit on not fouling. We try to keep our team out of the bonus for no more than 3 minutes per half. Now, the other night we guarded at a high level, but I was talking to you on the phone after the game, and I was really, really pleased. But what happened to us that did hurt us a little bit is our opponent entered the fourth quarter in the bonus, and we give up 16 points through the first 3 quarters, and then give up 15 points in the fourth quarter, and give up over half those at the line. So, there's certain factors that we try to base those things on as we go. But I also think, going back to your thing about it, sometimes it's not even spotting another defense. I certainly wouldn't be against, but because of that practice time, other than maybe just trying to give the opponent a different look or to just try to trick somebody, what I have found is we've put so much time into the defense, it's just easier to make the adjustment within what we do than it is to try to confuse the opponent. Because if you haven't put nearly the amount of preparation or time in the other, you're almost confusing your own kids, if that makes sense. Like you're putting them out there in something they're not trained to do or run as well, and the coverages and the rotations Does that make sense a little bit to
Yeah,
you?
let me ask you. Let me ask you
You
this.
just saying, hey, let's all of a sudden not switch screens the next 2 minutes.
No,
That would take
right?
a little
Yeah,
bit of a different,
yeah.
look.
You can't really do that because you haven't practiced it. Let me ask you this though. So give me an example of you're playing man to man. Everybody that comes in there knows you're playing man to man. So you're not tricking anybody, right? They know. They know you play man. They come in. They go against you. You do what you do well. You're not easy to score against. But for whatever reason, you're struggling one night. Something's going wrong. Whatever it is, maybe it's foul trouble. Maybe it's some kind of matchup issue. Maybe it's one player losing their mind and they're scoring at a crazy clip. You said try to adjust within what you do. Not to put you on the spot here, but try to give me an example of what that looks like. Give me an example of adjusting within what you do within the game. I mean, it's the middle of the third quarter and you got to do something different. Give me an example of how you do it.
Yeah, no, probably 80% of the time, if not higher, if those things are happening, it probably goes to a breakdown in a principle, like one of our absolute non-negotiables, right? There's probably a breakdown in the ball getting to the middle. Getting the ball to the middle leads to fouling. Getting the ball to the middle, especially as little as we are, leads to offensive rebounds, rebounding problems.
Right.
So there's a couple of things we'll do. If it's a special player, we'll do what we call soften the dribble gap. So like we're very aggressive in the next pass in line, but if player so and so's are really talented, well, like with her graduating now playing at the D1 level, Allison Basie, our local listeners will know that really well. Special talent. When she played at Huntington, we had to get softer in the dribble gap, we call it. I mean, we had to slough off a little bit, and we had to try to do everything we could not to let her into the middle. Really hard. I mean, she was a special player. That's an example of the dribble gap. Maybe if it's a post player, we're going to start to cheat a little bit more with our help, and we're going to touch over the top, we're going to call it. So instead of just normal midline where you're reading it, no, we're going to come clear across the midline, and we're going to touch the back. We call it touch the back, and now we're going to force them to throw the skip against us to see if we can't get them out of character a little bit. So usually, to answer your question, I hope that does it, is there's probably a breakdown in the ball getting to the middle somehow. Because if it's not, it's probably just a special player making some special shots that we always talk about. Don't overreact to talent. You know what I mean? Like I remember Doc Rivers one time saying in the NBA Finals when he was coaching against Kobe. He would talk to his guys about that. Don't overreact to talent. When he goes on his spurts where he hits the incredible shots, you can't overreact to that. You just got to make him hit back to back tough shots. Sometimes you'll come across those special players. You mentioned the young man from Alexander that you coached against. He's terrific. The young man at Wellston last night scored 50. So some nights you just run into a guy or a gal that's just flat can play. You know what I mean? And you definitely want some different things, but those are some of the things that we would simply try to adjust to. And then I'm very, very blessed because I coach an incredible group of young ladies in terms of effort and attitude. But let's face it, Matt, some nights the answer is you got to play a little harder. Some nights, are you closing out? Can you close out a step harder? Can you box out a little bit better? Can you front just a little bit better? Can you rotate a step quicker? Yeah, probably so.
Yeah, you had mentioned a couple different times the word non-negotiables and some things that, and I think that's an interesting topic because don't you feel like, Shayne, we can sit here and talk different approaches, right? We've just given you both ends of the spectrum on man-to-man, right? I mean, switching everything, not switching everything, playing it a certain way. And I think what it goes to show you is there's more than one way to get the job done, right? I mean,
no question.
But
there's incredible zone coaches out there.
But I mean, and we haven't even talked about zones or stuff like that, but there's great zones. I mean, there's teams that played zone in my career that you just hated to play against because it was man, if we don't make a few shots tonight, it became so hard to get the ball where you wanted it, especially if They had great length. I mean, we played against the Athens team when they had Joey Burrow and those guys. And you're talking like 6'5", 6'5", 6'4". I mean, they had 4 Division I athletes on the floor at the same time at one point, between football and basketball players. Length, and I mean, it looked like there was 7 guys. There was nowhere to throw the ball. There was nowhere to get the ball, and it was very difficult. But so there's more than one way to get it done. But those non-negotiables you're talking about, don't you feel like there's a few things defensively that no matter what defense you play, you have to do? You know what I mean? Don't you feel like there's some of those things? Like you had mentioned, I'll just go ahead and start, not to steal your thunder if you had some things in mind, but like I know there's more than one, I'm sure. The thing with me was always being able to guard the ball, like on ball defense. I felt like that was always, I mean, for me, that was always number one, because I used to tell our guys, there's never been a defense invented where you can just get beat off the dribble all night long and give up penetration. You know what I mean? I wish there was, fellas, but there's not. You know, there's no.
Yeah, some years you'd be like, hey, we'd be pretty good if there was, because we do it every other
team in the league this year defensively. Getting beat off the dribble was the goal. But no, I mean, you have to be able to guard the ball. I mean, I feel like it starts and almost stops in some sense of the theory with just the ball in front, because you had mentioned a couple things already. When you get beat off the dribble, you foul, you give up threes, you give because people overhelp and you have to kick, you give up back rebounds because you're not positioned to rebound. I mean, letting that ball around, letting that ball into the paint, that was one of our non-negotiables, and I know it was one of yours, but I think truthfully, I feel like that's sort of an obvious one. You know what I mean? I can't imagine ever talking to a coach and say, hey, give me 3 or 4 of your absolutes with your defense, and then not talk about guarding the ball. I can't, you know what I mean? I just don't think any coach would leave that out. I've got a few here. I'll let you go, I guess, next. Give me another one of your quote unquote, I know you've kind of touched
right off the top of my head, I guess, and this is very much more of me in the second half of my coaching career, if I'm being honest. You always wish as your older self you could go back and tell your younger self, but like there's 2 things that don't even hardly get to the floor yet. Number one, I don't care what defense you're playing, the way I would say it to a young coach, or an old coach for that matter, is defense has to be a non-negotiable in terms of effort and attitude that is held accountable by the person in charge of giving out playing time. You know what I'm saying? So like if you know, I guarantee you, as good as Matt Combs was as a player, there was a time early in your career you understood that, daggone man, if I don't defend and rebound, I'm not going to play, and I want to play, right? I mean, it was one of those things where there was an accountability from your head coach, where when things got going the wrong way, he'd get your attention one way or the other. It has to be non-negotiable from the person that's handing out playing time, that no, you're going to defend or you're not going to play. That's number one. Number two, no matter what defense you play, I don't care if you switch screens, I don't care if you play a 1-3-1 or a 3-2 or a mixer or whatever you're doing, or even a junk defense. I can't imagine in today's time, unless you're just so much more talented than every opponent. And there are teams out there that, you know, they're better than 80-90% of the teams they play as soon as they walk on the court. But even then, I can't imagine going in without having some sort of scouting and some sort of film work.
Right.
In today's time, that was so much harder even at the beginning of our career. Would you agree? The old VHS tapes and how do you get this and how do you get that? With the day of the huddle, in the day of, you can sit right there on your couch at whatever hour of the day you want, and you can study your film, get a couple notes down, show a couple clips to your team. To me, those are the things that I think are missing sometimes. I see coaches not holding kids accountable on the defensive end, and I see people not preparing. You know, I'll just give you a quick example. We try to take pride, and we say we want our scouting preparation to give us +10. So in other words, like no matter how bad we play or what we give up, we want our scouting report to save us +10. Maybe it's on OB unders, things like that. I scouted a team the other night. They won the game by 7, and they scored 13 points on their out of bounds plays underneath.
Oh yeah.
I mean, that's a lot. You know what I'm saying? Like it's so.
And not to interrupt you, Shane, but like, hold your thought because I don't want to throw you off what you're saying. But it's an overlooked part. You know what I mean? It's like one of those details, like you're talking about. Like it blows my mind when coaches don't take a few minutes in their prep to go over the other team's OB unders. You know what I'm saying? Like, I honestly think there are some coaches that just kind of think like, yeah, okay, it's their OB unders. I mean, like you just said it yourself. I mean, you got to figure throughout the course of a game, there's probably going to be minimum of 3 or 4 OB unders, probably more like 7 or 8. So now,
sometimes girls basketball they're gonna be 20.
Well, I get that, right? No, it depends on the level of play. Yeah, like JV, you know, the held ball capital of the world sometimes, you know. But yeah, I mean, there's going to be that. But what I'm saying is, but to not go over that, what'd you say they scored? What'd you say they scored 12? Well, how much?
I had them down to 13 points on their
13.
OB.
Think about that for a minute, man. That's like a quarter of the points in a game.
And that counts like getting fouled, going to the line, but they got fouled off of the action, or they hit a 3, or they had an and one, or you know, yeah.
Right. If you don't have an approach to guarding that, you know, are you going to guard the guy with the ball? Like, are you going to cover him up? Are you going to play underneath the basket and protect? Are you going to zone? And, you know, are you going to deny? You know, we used to go what we call 400, which is we were trying to literally get a steal or 5-second call on every OB under. That was our goal. We did not want to let even the first pass come in easy because we just felt like it was more disruptive. And, you know, but regardless of your approach, how can you not take some time to scout that? You know? I mean, I don't know. I got off on a tangent there, but anyway, I just feel like I guess I always felt like every coach took that very seriously, but I don't know that like every coach does. I think it's an overlooked part of your defensive prep a little bit, you know. But anyway, I interrupted you there. I hope you remember kind of where.
No, I did. But basically, it was. And everybody has to have their level of comfort in what their kids can do. But I would even challenge you: don't fall into the trap of I don't think our guys or our girls can do this, or we're young and we don't know. You know what I mean? Teach them how to watch film, teach them how to read a scouting report, and you'd be surprised. You know, what I found is by the time kids are juniors and seniors, they could almost do the film session for me, and that's when it's really. I mean, like when they're out there on the court calling the play out before it happens, and they're doing different things. That's important. Now, like I said, maybe you're so elite athletically, and you're so much better than your opponent some nights. Maybe it doesn't matter. But I just think if you set a certain standard and you teach your kids how to play, and especially understanding the concepts of your defense, your leaders especially can coach for you on the court. Like I'll guarantee you, some of your most experienced kids could turn to someone and say, "Hey, you got to talk to me on that switch right there. That we almost got beat on that slip. We've got to do this, or this, right?" And it's one of those things where that junior, senior, who's been switching screens for 2 or 3 years, probably was able to talk a younger kid through that.
You know, Shane, you said too. You said you've used the words here in the last 5 minutes here about accountability and have standards and all this. What like specific X and O things, if you can think of any off the top of your head, do you literally chart or talk about, you know what I mean? Like, hey, we let the ball in the paint X number of times, or, you know, do you talk numbers with your guys, like your girls? Do you talk, hey, do you have a goal? I mean, like goals can be a little weird because you can say, okay, we want to make sure we don't, foul more than X number of fouls a game, but depending on how the game goes, that could change, right? You might, you may have to foul more, or it just may be that type of game. But I'm saying, like, do you have, when I was talking about non-negotiables, do you have some things there that are like, that you literally chart and talk about, I guess, that are staples? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're very careful. And I know sometimes on these league leaders and stuff, they'll post them or whatever, and it's always fun to watch them and look at it and see how you're doing or whatever. But we're always very, very careful on our points allowed per game, because I think that's a very deceiving stat sometimes.
Sure. That could be tempo related. Right?
Yes, the way fourth quarters play out, like One year we were 19-5. Well, we gave up a lot, or we didn't give up very many points. Well, because in the fourth quarter, 19 times we were ahead.
Right,
You know, saying
right.
like we weren't fouling. Whereas other years we might have been just as good defensively, but you know we were 500. So maybe like you said, there was times where you're fouling on purpose for the last 3.5 minutes because it's strategic,
Right.
you know, or different things. We certainly chart some of the middle. We certainly chart. We pay close attention to our offensive rebounding that we allow. Those types of things. But I'll tell you one just that comes to my mind that maybe would be unique that maybe a lot of coaches don't think about. You heard me earlier say it's really important to me to take a look at how much time did our opponent spend in the bonus.
Right.
And we talk to our kids a lot about never force the coach to take your minutes away because of foul trouble.
Right.
We only want, and you know, obviously a lot of times you're talking to your best players here, but let's face it, most high school teams, there's some elite that have more athletes than they know what to do with. Maybe they are 8, 9, 10 deep. I don't know. Most high school teams are what, 6, 7 deep?
Yeah, because that's a whole different topic. I think we live in a day and age where we try to keep kids happy a little bit more. I get it. When you're trying to build a program, you almost have to try to, stretch that rotation to 8 or 9 to sort of keep guys engaged. But if we're being real honest, most teams are probably 5 to 7 deep. And they think they might be 9 deep, or they have to be 9 deep for chemistry purposes, right? But
so let me ask it this way. I'll just put it back in a question to you. Here's how I'm talking to like our starters, to our very best players. If you think of your best teams, if you in your mind you had one of your top 4 players to play, say 27, 28, 29, and 30 minutes respectively.
Right.
If you reach those goals, I bet your Vinton County record was pretty good.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? Because your 4 players played the exact amount of minutes at the exact time you wanted them to play. Right. The times where in the second quarter, in the first quarter, or the second quarter, or the third quarter, or the fourth quarter foul out that you had to, not by choice, but by game time management situation, take them out of the game. Well, now you are playing a lesser version of your team. Does that make sense? Right. Now, that's not to say bench isn't important. That's not to say that bench person shouldn't come in and pick it up and do the, but let's face it, everybody has a top 2 or 3 or 4 players, right? And when they don't play their minutes, like I've seen some young players get bit by foul trouble here in our area, just scouting and watching boys games and different things, where I'll see certain kids, they'll come out and have a real nice game of like 14, 15 points. You're like, oh, nice game or whatever. And then you'll see them the next night, 2 fouls first quarter, 3 fouls in the second quarter, 4 or 5. And before you know it, they're like, daggone, I mean, I bet they didn't play 12 minutes tonight. They had 4 points. So it's one of those things where, because when we chart the middle and we chart fronting the post and we chart offensive rebounds, those are where fouls come from. So we talk a lot about positioning leads to, like growing up. How do you feel about this? Let me just give a pet peeve. One time, remember we did a show on expanding the zone of pet peeves.
Oh yeah.
One of the things I can't handle is like, if you only fouled one time tonight, you're not playing very hard.
Yeah,
I mean, man, I think that's about as dumb as anything I've ever heard.
Oh,
I mean, like, it's just like, I see some kids play really, really hard, and they end the game 32 minutes later with like 1 foul. Why? Because they play really, really hard, and they get to the right spot, and they show their hands, and they take charges, and they box out, and they do. You follow me there? So, like, I think if you chart bonus and you chart individual foul trouble, coaches will become really aware of their substitution patterns. Well, if so-and-so only played 25 minutes tonight and she wasn't in foul trouble and she's supposed to play 30 or 31 minutes, well, why? Why'd you have her out? You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things. So that's something, when you were mentioning that, just comes to my mind that I'm really, really passionate about in terms of looking at the foul trouble.
Yeah, well, I think my point to it was, and that is very interesting, taking a look at the time your opponent's in the bonus, because I think ultimately with your defense, you're trying to prevent those points that are outside the realm of your normal, points that the other team gets. So in other words, those free throws that you give them. For us, and and again, my point was more like, what do you chart? What do you literally like show your team? Like, we did this 12 times tonight, or they did this 8 times tonight. But I think it brought to mind something that I've always believed in, which is we always tried very hard not to give up the 3. That was one of the things we believed in, because we felt like, switching picks, you're always out, kind of extending out. And there's really no excuse not to be out there and be aggressive.
Yeah.
But we always felt like, I always felt like the 3-point shot was the backbreaker. It was like that great equalizer. If you're better than a team, the 3-point shot sets up the upset, right? I mean, a lot of times when you see the upset, it's that 3-point shot that causes that, or it gives a team that's maybe not quite as good as another team on paper a puncher's chance one night if they can shoot the ball well, right, from the perimeter. And we always felt like that 3-point shot, Shane, was every time a 3 went in, I just felt like somebody punched me in the gut. We just did not want to give up the 3. We usually had a number on that. Now, again, it's a little dangerous to set a numeric goal, because depending on the situation, right? I mean, you might one night give up a 3 get a few more 3s because, maybe you felt like you had to play a little bit of a zone, and a team made, 7 3s, but they took 33s or something stupid. Then, maybe then the percentage.
Maybe a role player. Maybe a role player knocked down a couple in the first quarter that you were willing to live with.
Right. Those types of things. Right. But that was something we always, I do believe that. I believe, I watched the game this year, just trying to use some examples of here recently. I had the opportunity to sneak over one night and watch Benton County play out Zane Trace. In my mind, 2 good teams. I think Zane Trace has a good team. I think Benton County is going to have a good team. And, and I watched the Zane Trace team kind of take it to Benton County in the post. They have some good bigs. They do a good job running their high-low stuff. And they threw it in there, and they scored around the basket. And the dynamic guard, they have the Ream kid. He got to the rim a little bit, and they scored at the rim. And it seemed like Zane Trace scored all these kind of easy baskets, right? There were way too many easy baskets that Benton County gave up that night. But at the end of the day, Benton County pulls off the win because they make 9 threes. You make 9 threes in a game, and you have to ask yourself, okay, because if you think about it, when you're shooting that 3 ball, you only have to shoot it at a 33% clip to equal a 50% clip from 2. So
sure.
So Benton County didn't have to be as efficient that night as Zane Trace did, because they were able to offset it with those 3s. So I think that, to me, that 3 ball was always really dangerous. But it's funny, what causes the 3? Well, it's the stuff you've already mentioned. It's letting the ball into the paint, right, which causes the kick out. It's the offensive rebounds that you give up to get kicked out for a wide open 3. It's all these little things that happen. It's the ball getting thrown into the post and then getting kicked inside out. All those things set up the 3. So a lot of what we talk about tonight, sets that up. But that's just one of the things we chart. That's why I asked you, what things do you literally chart, and sort of, because I think sometimes I do think in today's day and age, kids have grown up around evidence of everything, right? Like they don't have to take your word for anything anymore, right? They can get on YouTube and watch it. They can find evidence of it. So like, if you tell them, hey, we can't foul, we need to limit fouls, that's one thing. But to show them evidence, like, look what happens when we do foul. You just played 5 less minutes tonight than you normally play. You took 5 less shots than you normally take because you were on the bench in foul trouble. Like, to be able to show them that analytical piece, I think, is important in today's day and age.
I agree. And, the one thing I want to shift here, I know we're going a little bit long this week because we're pretty passionate about this stuff. The one thing I don't want to leave out, because I know how passionate we are about what we do, but we're also very respectful to the game we love. There's so many different ways to do it. Like I said, I've been a part of some great staffs that taught some incredible zones and some different things. What is it about zones? What is it about You touched on it with the Athens zone that you played against. What is it about junk defenses? What is it about some of these other things that are so hard to play against? And is it because it takes away your quick hitter playbook? Is it because some of these zone offenses are kind of cookie cutter and it's kind of they know what they're going to get? What's something that jumps out in your mind that you like about zones, you like about the junk defenses that allows you the opportunity to give someone a completely different look and something that you can really, really get good at if that's what you believe in, and you can be just as successful?
Yeah, the reason I like zone and spots, okay, even if, like we said earlier, you can't practice it as much and maybe you don't become as good at it. I don't think you have to be as good at it to run it in spots because, to be honest with you, you just hit on a couple. Teams typically against it are very vanilla and predictable. It's like, oh, we're going to play zone. Here's the high post and the low post and the high post and the low post. And we reverse the ball. And we cut a guard through. And it's like, and what happens, your kids get a sense of, oh, they know right where the other team's going. He's going here. He's going here. So, and I don't think teams have as many quick hitters against zone. We always tried to, because of that, we probably had 7 or 8 quick hitters we ran against zone. I don't know that most teams have that many. That's what we believed in because we didn't want to fall into this trap of being predictable. But even then, that was still probably about a third of our man-to-man playbook. So, even when you try to have stuff like that, you're never going to have as advanced a playbook against zone as you do man. I think, against zone, that no matter how good you are at executing, you're going to have to make a few shots. So again, if you're playing a team that lacks outside shooting or whatever, it can cause a problem. It can change the pace. All those things, I think, Shane, for me, and same way with junk defense, you can just throw that in too, the triangle 2, a box and 1. We call these junk. I don't know. It's kind of disrespectful. I think they're creative, truthfully.
No, that's true.
But that's just sort of what we say. But I think there's a place for those. There's a place because, NJ Kite, a good buddy of mine, who's my assistant for years, I always liked the way he put it. He said, whenever I'd ask him about, should we try this or what do you think about this? He always had he said, what would the other coach want us to do? That was a question he always asked me. If you were coaching that other team we're getting ready to play, what would you prefer to see? And then maybe, and let's face it, when's the last time you went into a game and said, man, you know what? I hope they play a triangle and 2 against us tonight. You're not saying that because, daggone well, it's going to be something your kids don't really know how to react to right away. So I guess what I'm saying is, what's wrong with those things and spots? I just think that people are afraid because it's really easy to be a purist, Shane. I know we both have a little bit of old school in us and a certain respect for the game, but I think sometimes if you're not careful, that purist becomes stubborn.
It does.
We don't allow ourselves to consider that because I guarantee this conversation right now, somebody's listening to this being like a triangle and 2. That's ridiculous. You know what I mean?
Right.
But why? I liked what Jay Billis said one time. He said, whether you play zone or not, that's your own choice. I listened to him at a coach's clinic. It was at a coach's clinic up in Columbus. He said, but my only question is, if you don't play zone, why? Like, have a reason. Don't just say, man, I think zone's stupid. Or I hate zone. Just like you don't play a lot of zone. Okay, hardly ever. But when I ask you why you don't play zone, you immediately, because I asked you this a couple weeks ago, hey, why don't you ever play a little bit of zone? You immediately had 2 or 3 reasons why you don't play much zone. You said, hey, we don't commit the time to practice that as much. We really focus on our man-to-man. One thing you said was you don't like to play a defense where you have to hope. You felt like zone calls you to have to hope sometimes that they miss because you got to give them something. They're going to get that shot. You had reasons.
Well, and I would say this too, Matt.
All I'm saying is have a reason.
I would say this too. Like a lot of times you said personnel. I think a big misconception in basketball, I don't know if you agree with this or not, it's something I've seen on the defensive end. I think a lot of times it's backwards in people's perception. I like zone with long, lanky athletes. Like when I think about the best zone coaches that I coach against, I can think about 3 or 4 of them right now. Their very best teams, they've got these arms forever, girls length, size, athleticism, right?
Right.
A lot of times, if I have the smaller, scrappy team, those are the teams I'm going to go ahead and play the man with, because the only chance I have of guarding the post is ball pressure, taking you out of what, fronting the post, different things. I see some of those same zone teams, and I think back over the last decade when they've had some of their smaller kids and they've tried to run the same zones, they just get shredded, right? They get diagonal, they get skipped, they get. So I do think a great message is, as we kind of maybe move toward our closing here, would be, if you are a zone coach, don't get stubborn with man. If you are a man coach, don't get stubborn with zone. You know what I mean? It's one of those things of be aware of who you are, who are your athletes, what kind of athletes, what could be some of their strengths. And I kind of like what you said there too. Sometimes if you're only going to play it 3 or 4 minutes a night, maybe you only need to practice it sparingly throughout the week just to have it to throw in.
Right. Yeah. You just got to be good enough.
Right.
Right. Just to basically,
because you're doing it as much for the look of the other team as you are for you, if I follow what you're saying.
Just to change the pace. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Matt, that's good stuff. I think, that's kind of my closing remark in terms of, we're very, very passionate, but I think for me, my biggest summary points I would hit on again would be the person passing out the playing time has to make defense a non-negotiable no matter what you play. If you don't play hard, I just don't see how you can be any good defensively. And then I would challenge people to try to take more advantage of today's technology and their scouting. Like, I don't know, no matter what defense you play, I don't know why you wouldn't want to go into a game and have an idea of what the other team does and who can hurt you and how they can hurt you.
Yeah, no, I agree completely with what you're saying. And in terms of my final thoughts, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of the show, because we kind of started talking identity and then kind of transitioned into specifically defense. But, one of the things that I thought came up twice tonight, 2 different ways, was basically when it comes to your identity as a program or as a team, you have to be willing to stay the course to a certain extent. Like, you can't, at one point we talked about, don't just waver just when the first sign of adversity or things don't go the way you want to. You got to stay kind of on track with what your identity is. Don't just throw it out and say, well, this isn't working, and try something. Oh, well, that's not working. And then you even mentioned defensively the comment about don't overreact to talent that I think you said, like Doc Rivers. Don't the first time a guy, you show zone, you spot end zone, and a guy hits a 30-foot three. Oh, can't go zone. Yeah, that didn't work. Well, the guy just shot a really low percentage shot, knocked it in. Is that you're going to get out of it right away? So I think staying the course in terms of your identity, in terms of your approach, not becoming stubborn and just refusing to adjust and adapt, but not just not changing with every little sign of adversity either, but just really staying on track with what you believe in. So it was an interesting conversation. I enjoyed it. I don't know, our podcast oftentimes on leadership and things like that, some people might be listening tonight. If you're not into the X and O of basketball, maybe you're about ready to fall asleep. But I think if you enjoy that part of the game, I hope that tonight's conversation was interesting to you.
Well, no, I think that's awesome. And when you link it back to leadership and you think of non-negotiables and you think of effort and attitude, I think a lot of things apply there. So it's a lot of fun. Matt, we'll get together. We kind of mentioned when we started this season that we were going to be doing a series on basketball. I think I'll get together here soon. And maybe go the same type of thing over on the offensive side. I think that'd be interesting to talk a lot of different things. There's a lot of different ways to go about it on that side as well. So as always, a thank you to Chris Good. Contact myself or Matt through social media, different things, email, different things that people are in the area and I know how to get a hold of us. Love to hear your thoughts, and we're going to be talking some basketball throughout the year. So Matt, enjoyed it. We'll get together soon and we'll talk a little offense. So on that note, for Matt Combs, this is Shayne Combs. This has been show 48 of Expanding the Zone. Thanks, everyone. Just get lonelier the longer you're in love than if you were alone. Memories turn into daydreams, become a taboo.